David Alonso was always expected to at least fight for, but really to win last year's Moto3 title. He did it in such a way that has made him more famous than a good chunk of the MotoGP grid, I would say. He has exceeded expectations and he has become the next big thing. What happens next is one of two things. Either he continues to match or exceed expectations as the next big thing, or he fails to live up to them. Before we get to that, Simon, how good has David Alonso been? How much of a pleasure has it been to watch him go about his business in Moto3?
So there's one thing I'm going to caveat this with before I start, and that's that while he's broken records in the longest ever Moto3 championship, I don't think the records are what we should be focusing on. Instead, we should be concentrating on how well he raced and how well he won the record number of races that he did. Because the kid has that innate ability to start the last lap of a Moto3 race amid all the chaos comfortably in fifth. And you just know he's going to win it. He's like this unstoppable force that by the time you get to the checkered flag is just going to be at the front, because his talent is so much that he can seemingly just pick his way through the pack at will. And that's an unusual thing to be able to do consistently in Moto3. But we've got to see him do it over and over again. And it's been wonderful to watch it, because there really is, a next level talent there. He's a step above everyone else in the class. It is no surprise at all that he did what he did, but credit to him for still managing to make it interesting. He wasn't winning races by 10 seconds, and he wasn't celebrating by slowly rolling around at the end of the race either, like someone quite cocky and arrogant that had expected to do it. He gave us a fantastic show, and he remained quite humble and quite grateful for it throughout, which is generally a sign that someone's going to go quite far in this championship whenever they've got a bit of pizzazz about them, as well as a mountain of talent.
There's a bit of old school Valentino Rossi in that style of racing, isn't there? Where you have so much margin that you get to use your, thinking capacities, your strategizing to see what's the optimal way to win, what's the least risky way to win. And David Alonso just has been consistently finding it. One of my favorite stats about him in Moto3 so far is he is the all-time leader in wins in the category since introduction by quite a lot. He isn't even top 10 in laps led all time. That tells you about the way he races, doesn't it? But with that always comes the question, how confident can we be that David Alonso isn't a pack racing specialist? How confident can we be that he isn't being flattered by the specifics of small bikes? Because, his achievements nobody can take away from him. But for MotoGP, the skill set it's a little different.
It is, but I think that there's not just pack racing skill set that we've seen from him, because for me, the kind of traditional Moto3 rider who's quite fast in that class but can't make it outside of that class are the ones who hang on to the back of the group until it gets to the end of the race and then makes kind of do or die aggressive lunges to try and get their way through. We've seen quite a few of those racing against David Alonso, but for me, there's something different about the way he does it. He looks like he has more to give at all points. He looks like he's only hanging back because it's fun to ride through the pack. I think that there's an extra element to his talent set that makes me think that this is not some sort of a Moto3 specialist who is going to go to Moto2 and not succeed like we've seen so many of them do in the past. I think everyone is fairly confident in their assessment that this kid is going to be a MotoGP rider before too much longer, really.
7 pole positions in his championship winning season, so clearly a bit of single lap pace as well. And I think that there have been plenty of sessions where you look at the timing screens and suddenly David Alonso is there like 4/10 in the clear. And I think that does make it clear, not just a pack racing merchant. With all that said, Moto2 is the big worry here, because Moto2, for some reason, and we'll go into this right now, brutal for rookies, really difficult, maybe more difficult than MotoGP, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. We've seen it over and over again. We've seen Moto3 riders perhaps a little bit comforted by their ability to hang on to the pack and then make those moves at the end of the race, get through to Moto2 and suddenly find themselves absolutely nowhere. I mean, it's not that long ago that Jaume Masia was a Moto3 world champion, and his Moto2 career has been so bad that he's off to World Supersport for 2025 after only a single season trying to struggle in the middleweight class. It is aggressive. It is hard work. It is super, super close in terms of times. And you have to be able to essentially do one lap pace on your own to be able to do anything in Moto2. And that record of pole positions, that row of front row starts that Alonso has easily clocked up. That, more than anything else, is a sign that he's going to do really well whenever he makes it to Moto2 next season. He's already got all of the elements that he needs. There's nothing that we haven't seen from this first championship season that makes me think that all the skill set isn't there.
Truth about modern Moto2 is, if a rider finishes top 10 in their first season, it's basically a rule they'll make it to MotoGP. It's not a rule that they will succeed, but it's basically a rule that a MotoGP team will take him on the strength of that season or one of the future seasons. It's a rule that they've got something about them, and it's been very interesting to observe every time. We've had some unusually phenomenal rookie Moto2 seasons. I mean, maybe Pedro Acosta's 5th place was nothing too special, but in the wider context, it actually quite is. Raul Fernandez's run to 2nd was incredible, and he hasn't quite lived up to that in MotoGP so far. For David Alonso, I think a lot of people will go into the season, especially people who maybe only just watch Moto2 sometimes, and they'll expect him to win right away, and they might be disappointed if he doesn't, or probably, I'm taking a risk here, when he doesn't. Because I don't expect him to do it, and you've spoken to him. You don't expect him to do it. I don't think he expects him to do it. What's reasonable for us to expect from David Alonso this year?
I mean, with how close Moto2 is and how competitive it is right now, which is a funny thing to say perhaps, because it doesn't always look like it's competitive when you see big gaps between the riders at the end of the race. But when you look at the qualifying times and there's a second covering 18 or 19 riders, that gives you much more of an impression of how tough it is. I think given that, if he's consistently in the top 10 by the second half of the season, that's going to show me everything that we need to see to get an idea that he's going to make it to MotoGP. Whenever you look at other riders who've come from really successful Moto3 seasons into Moto2, basically it's Pedro Acosta and only Pedro Acosta that's been right at the sharp end right away, at least in recent times. Everyone else that's come has struggled. So if he's somewhere in between those, if he's somewhere between fighting for the points and Acosta's really impressive rookie season, whenever we all absolutely know what to expect from Pedro Acosta, then I think that he's, Alonso's going to be really comfortably in a position where MotoGP teams are going to be looking for him, perhaps even as soon as 2026, rather than having to wait and do 2 years there, because that's another thing that we've seen that has consistently been the hallmark of a really, really fast Moto2 rider with loads of MotoGP potential, that they only spend a single season. And I'm looking at, people like Joan Mir, even that far back. That is kind of a trademark move. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something like that from Alonso.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, because, the Joan Mir example looms large in your head. He wasn't a phenomenal Moto2 rookie when you think about it, but Suzuki never needed him to be, and Suzuki massively hugely benefited from the idea of just, cutting out his Moto2 development, going, okay, we've seen enough, go do your thing on MotoGP, accelerate that. Alonso is clearly, when we've heard him speak, he's ready to make this Moto2 thing a multi-year project. Does he need it to be a multi-year project? Is it more important to just do the bare minimum in Moto2 and then set about the ultimate goal, which is becoming a MotoGP superstar? How do you feel about that?
He doesn't need it to be, but it depends on not just him, but everything else that's going on around him as well. I mean, does he want to be a MotoGP rider as soon as possible? Yes, of course, absolutely. That's the goal for all of them. But is it better to be, say, an LCR Honda MotoGP rookie in 2026, or to wait for a factory Ducati contract in 2027? It depends on the opportunities that are presented. It depends on what the rider market does, where other names and other people go, who's willing to make space for him within the ranks, and what he wants to do as well. I mean, we're in a bit of an uncertainty right now because he is obviously, a product of the KTM system in a sense, because the Aspar CF Moto team is a KTM subsidy in ways, not quite the way that some of the other KTM backed teams are, but he is a product of their system. They're going to be the ones that want to have first dibs on him, and probably have some sort of a contractual agreement that they get first dibs on him, because that's what we've seen from KTM in the past. But we don't know right now whether or not they're going to be able to execute that, what the future is going to look like for that manufacturer and for the championship as a whole without them or with them. So essentially it's too early to tell, because it's so dependent on what goes on around David Alonso.
As I alluded earlier, I expect him to disappoint some fans, some observers who expect the world. Think there's any risk of the MotoGP paddock falling out of love if the transition to Moto2 is as difficult as it so often is?
No. I think that the MotoGP paddock are largely convinced that this kid is the next big thing, that he's the next talent coming up through the ranks. More so than anyone else, I think, that is not in MotoGP right now. And there's going to be a lot of attention paid to him. He's in a team that knows how to get the best out of riders. He's in a team that will know how to nurture him, and he's in a team that will help him actually communicate quite well what is going on. So I don't think that there's going to be any risk of the paddock not seeing things the way they are, and I think his talent's going to do the rest of the talking for him.